Hello everybody, welcome back. Here we are again with another English 375 class. This time we're going to have a little lecture where we continue talking about movement. Kind of. We're going to do a little sidebar today, and today we're going to be focusing mostly on negation. Negation is a topic that we haven't covered in class yet. It's one of those things that we don't know how to do yet. Again, recalling our goal from way back at the beginning of the semester that we want to be able to have a set of rules that generates all the grammatical sentences of English and none of the ungrammatical ones. Well, excuse me, we're going to continue that today, exploring a new set of grammatical sentences that we don't have the rules to account for yet. And that's negation, namely negation. This is still a lead-in. This is still kind of on brand, on topic for where we're going to be going talking about movement. Negation actually involves some movement, or there are subjects which we need to talk about negation first in order to talk about, and some of those are movement topics. So it's a stepping stone for us to talk about more movement in our trees. Okay, that's enough for preamble. Let's hop right into it. We've got 3 topics for today. This is what we're going to be doing. We're going to start off by just looking at negation and how it's done. How do we do this? How do we fit it into our trees? Where does it go? What's it look like? What's the tree structure look like? That's going to be number 1. Number 2 is that we're going to see another instance of do support. A third instance of this kind of expletive insert, this time again with do. We saw that it, dummy it, expletive it, insertion in sentences like it rained. We also saw one form of do support in these question words, questions without modals, where it was like, did I go to the store? Did I go to the store? And what's that did doing there? Well, it's kind of just filling a spot in C to give the tense a place to attach to. And we're going to find a very similar thing to that last one happening here with negation. That's topic number 2. We'll talk about that briefly. And then lastly, we're going to be talking about the difference between modal verbs being things like might, could, should, things of that nature, and auxiliary verbs, things like have and be, and things like I have gone to the store. And we're going to see if there's actually a difference between things like I should go to the store and I have gone to the store, and tease those apart. This talk about auxiliaries is going to lead us into our next topic. That's going to be our bridge to the next movement topic, which we'll cover in the next lecture. So I'll lead you up through negation up to that point of auxiliary verbs, and then in the next one, we'll hop back on the movement train. That's the plan. Let's hit it however long it takes. Let's look at negation to start. Sweet. So we want to look, at negated sentences to figure out where negation goes. This is usually by like adding the word not to a sentence, right? That's typically how we negate sentences. So we can see sentence pairs like this. I should lie versus I shouldn't lie, right? You have the sentence I should lie, which we should all be able to draw the tree for by now. That should be totally fine. Except that's not what we want, right? Lying's bad. We don't want to be liars, so we're going to negate it and try and make this I should not lie. So let's see if we can do some sort of transformation. We'll start with this first sentence, I should lie, and we'll see if we can build from it this sentence, I should not lie. Go to this side. Ooh, there we go. Here is our sentence. It should be fairly straightforward of I should lie, right? This is how we would draw this sentence. I should lie. We've got our CP going to C, which we're not using right now, TP going to T, which we are using, right? That's where we put our modal verb should. We've got a DP that I'm cheating for over here and just putting a little triangle because we're not really interested in DP structures today. We've already been there. That should be straightforward. And again, VP, go to V bar, go to V lie. Yeah. You're probably saying to yourself, I got it. I should lie. We can figure this sentence out. And so now we need to know, where does this not go? Like, clearly, linearly, it goes between should, and lie, right? So we need to decide whether we want it to be a modifier of lie or whether we actually want it to be heading up its own phrase and lie to modify it. The reasons for this we can talk about in more depth if you'd like, or you can just take my word for it. Either one is just fine. We're going to want this to actually head up its own phrase that's going to be between the TP and the VP. It's actually going to be its own branch. It's actually going to, VP is actually going to modify this negation phrase. And I'm going to erase this, modify this guy, and add in the negation and give you, show you what that looks like very quickly here. Awesome. So here we go. I'm going to show you what that negation looks like. So we have the same thing up top with our I and should, but instead of T bar going to a VP, here we put something in the middle. We put this between the should and the lie. Right? This is a negation phrase, neg P. So we have a new type of phrase now, neg P, negation phrase. And it follows our normal X bar rules, just like you would expect it to. Neg P goes to neg bar, goes to neg. And under that we have not. From neg bar we have this VP structure coming out. And from this point we continue our normal with a VP, V bar, V. And if it had a complement, it would be stemming out here. And if it had adjuncts, you would add more V bars. You would continue like normal. This series here, neg P, neg bar, and neg are the only difference. Does this get us the right word order? Always a good thing that we want to check into once we've drawn a tree, particularly one that we haven't done much with yet. Does this get us the sentence we actually want? I should not lie. Right? We had I should lie over there. Now we want I should not lie, even though I erased the I on accident. Yeah, it gets us the right order, right? I should not lie. I should not lie. So perfect. That's actually straightforward. Look, we're like 5 minutes in and you've learned something new. Okay, we're like 8 minutes in. Negation. This is how you do negation in trees. Relatively straightforward. We're just adding this new phrasal structure coming from T-bar. So now from T-bar we have optionality. T-bar can either go to a neg B or T-bar can go straight to a VP. Either way is fine. It just depends on if you have negation or not, which one you choose. Boom, we nailed it. But things are a little more complicated than that. That's topic 1. Let's move on to topic 2 and look at do support, right? So when we were looking at these sentences, we looked at the difference between I should lie and I should not lie. Sentences with a modal verb, because that makes it more clear what's going on here. Having a modal verb actually helps us to see negation more clearly. Let's try now a sentence without a modal verb, just like a regular sentence, right? So let's look instead, we'll still use the same relative structure. We're going to look at the sentence I lied, right? No modal there, just the ed in tense. So instead of the should being generated in T there, now we're going to generate that past tense ed. I lied. I lied. And how would we negate that? How would you negate that? I lied versus I didn't lie. I didn't lie. Right? The counterpart to I lied in English is I did not lie. I lied versus I did not lie. If we were gonna kind of keep it using this pattern, what would have we expected? It's an odd leading question. I'm just gonna tell you. What we don't get here is something like this. I not lied. Right? I lied becomes I did not lie. It doesn't become I not lied. Of course, if we're native speakers of English, we know of course it doesn't go to this. Of course it doesn't. But if we're thinking of this structurally, and this is the structure we want for negation, well then we have some explaining to do, right? Because it should, using our normal rules, our expectations up to this point, the only thing we should be doing is replacing should with the past tense ed. So we should be replacing it like this. I would not lie, right? And then we do our normal affix lowering to get this ed onto the lie. Like this. And we would get the sentence, I not lied. But again, that's clearly not what we get in English, right? We get instead, I did not lie, not, I not lied. So what's going on here? Well, the nice part about this that I actually do want to be on this side, I led you to this particular structure of negation with neg p, neg bar, and neg, is that we actually have a fairly ready-made solution to this problem. And the ready-made solution is that there's a problem with our lowering operation, this lowering operation. And the problem with that lowering operation, perhaps you already see it, is that this negation phrase is in the way. It's in the way. It's interrupted now. T isn't right next to this T chain from TP, T bar T, isn't right next to VP, V bar V any longer. There's something in the way. And so what happens is, we'll see how good my whiteboard mirrored image skills are. This gets interrupted, right? It can no longer lower down onto the verb. It can't do it anymore because this not is in the way. It gets in the way. And so now, okay, so we don't have this here either because that didn't happen. So now we're stuck here. We're stuck because the ed can't lower down to the v because the neg is in the way. Bully over here interrupts their party. So what do? We get to this point in our sentence construction. And we have I would not lie. I past not lie. That's not pronounceable in English. We've already talked about this, ed, past tense, the plus past tense, that it needs to attach to something in order to be pronounced, in order for it to make sense. That's why it wants to drop down here in the first place, so that it can attach to something. Now it can't do that anymore, so we need to do something else. And here, our emergency powers kick in, our grammatical emergency powers, and we add in this dummy did, this expletive did. Where do we add it in? Well, we add it in right where we need it, in T. It's do support. We add in our do support. So it's not really, we're actually adding in do. We're not adding in did. It's going to become did in a second. You'll see that, but I misspoke. We add in this dummy verb do into T. As an emergency repair, because we can't do that affix lowering, and we have to get something else in there for that past tense to attach to. So we add in this do for the past tense to attach to it. Ed, past tense, same thing. I changed it here, but it doesn't really matter. So we add that in. And now we do this combination where we know that the past tense form of do is did. That's a morphological operation there. Not one we're terribly concerned with. Boom. Did. Wham. I. And so now we've inserted this do and it's changed to did so that we can connect the tense to something because we can no longer drop it down onto lie. And now what sentence do we get? I did not lie. And what sentence did we actually want over here? I did not lie. That actually gets us our correct derivation. So this is, yeah, it works. It works. We have to add in this do support, but we've already seen this kind of support happen. We saw it happen up here if you rewatch the last lecture with our T to C movement. We already found do support happening up in C in just the same circumstances when tense doesn't have anything to attach to. That's when you get the do support. We found something similar happening with this it, expletive it insertion in scenarios like it rained where we didn't have a subject. So it's when we get to a point in the sentence where we're clearly missing something, something breaks. That something can either be, oh shoot, I don't have a subject, give me an it, like an it rained, to satisfy the EPP. Or it can be, oh shoot, my affix here, my plus past, needs to attach to something and it can't. Let's add in a do. They're very similar operations there. That's called do support. Do support. And so now we've explained I did not lie. So now we can understand how negation works when you have a modal, I should lie versus I should not lie, and when you don't have a modal, I lied versus I did not lie. As a sort of mini aside, this is actually one of the good pieces of evidence that neg P appears where it does in order to block this movement from the affix, this affix lowering movement from T to V. If the negation phrase instead were just a simple sort of adverbial modifier off of V bar, coming off of this left side of V bar, directions are hard, this left side of V bar, we wouldn't really have the same arguments there. Because it's other adverbs don't block this affix lowering, right? I often ran, where ran is past tense, and the often isn't blocking the past tense from T to C there. I often run, I often ran. Yeah. So normal adverbs don't block this, but negation does. Some evidence that, like we said here, negation's not just a normal adverbial, it's actually kind of its own central line thing. Sweet. So, now, where are we? We've covered negation. We've covered do support. Let's move on, and we're going to talk about a difference between modals and auxiliaries. Making some room for myself here. Okay, class, I have a confession to make. I've been avoiding something. Whenever we talk about these kind of auxiliary helping verbs, they've often been called in traditional English grammar, I've been using exclusively modal verbs. I've been using exclusively modal verbs like should and might and will, could, these kinds of things. But there's another kind of friend, a buddy of these modal verbs, which are auxiliaries. These are things like have and be. Have and be. And so we want to look now that we have more information, we've hit a certain point where I can't just not talk about these things anymore. We're going to talk about these things. But we've hit a certain point, and the reason I'm bringing them up now is we've actually hit a point where we can differentiate between these two things, modal verbs and auxiliaries. They look very similar, right? Let's think of some examples here. If we think of some examples, we can think of sentences like this. Well, we had the sentence, I should lie. We could also have the sentence, I have lied. I'm going to write these sentences out, and I'm also drawing them on the board. So give me just a second here. And we're going to undo our negation for the moment. It'll be back in just a second. So we have these, whoops, this side. I have these sentences, I should lie and I have lied. And structurally, these seem to be pretty similar, right? From a structural standpoint, there's a sense in which we can see we could have I should lie here, or we could have I have lied, right? So they look quite similar. It looks as though both the modal verb, like should, and the auxiliary verb, like have, are appearing here under T. We have reasonably good evidence of this. The distributions seem the same. The distributions seem the same. There's this that needs explanation, right? Why lied, lied. We're largely going to cover that next class. Next topic, we're going to talk extensively about affix. But for now, we just want to talk about the positioning of a modal versus a auxiliary. And here we find that they look very, very similar. It's actually the reason we haven't talked about them up to this point. Up to this point, they've been behaving similarly. But now, let's re-engage negation. Let's think about where these things appear with respect to negation. So I'm going to put negation back on the board. Let's see. Negation. So I slotted negation back in there. Let's see if this differentiates it. Spoiler alert, not yet. But we're building up to it. So now we have negation back in our tree. And we have the sentence, I should not lie. And we have the sentence, I have not lied. Are those both grammatical sentences of English? Yes. Those are both grammatical sentences of English. Those sound totally fine. I should not lie, I have not lied. Boom. But what about if we can we get both should and have? That's a question we want to ask ourselves. Can we get both should and have in the same sentence? This, hopefully, you'll recall other instances of this idea. And the idea here that I want to highlight is, if we're trying to test to see if two things are generated in the same place as the same category, in this case T, we want to see if we can generate both of them in the same sentence. If you can't generate both of them, but you can only get one, that's pretty good evidence that they're in the same place and you only have one slot for them. That's why you can only get one, because you have to choose here between should and have. Which one are you going to generate in T? Well, you can't have both in T. We saw this same idea with things like the apostrophe S being generated in D, where we said, well, can you have the apostrophe S and another determiner at the same time? And the answer here was no. You can have like, you know, a house's balcony, a house's balcony, or you can have the balcony. But you can't have a house's the balcony with both a z and the. A house's the balcony. A house's the balcony. It doesn't sound good, right? And that's a reminder that the reason that doesn't work is because the s apostrophe s possessive and the determiner are trying to fill the same slot. They're things that are of the same type. Okay, now I've been talking about this for a little while. You probably have thought to yourself, can I get both should and have in the sentence at the same time? Can you do that? Yeah, you can do that, right? If it's a non-negated sentence, you could have something like, I should have lied. I should have lied. What does this show us? Well, in a sentence like, I should have lied, I'll write this one down. I'm not going to draw the tree out here because I already have my negation on there. I should have lied. While we don't want to put too much stock in linear order, we can nonetheless see that should remains higher in the tree and have is lower. Should keeps that sort of left position where have gets pushed off of it, right? And they're not switchable. I should have lied. You can't have the sentence, I have should lied. No, it's no good. No good. This is hinting at something already. It's hinting at the positional difference between a modal and an auxiliary. And this is reinforced when we add negation back in, right? How do we negate this sentence? How do we negate this sentence? How do you negate the sentence, I should have lied? Well, you get the sentence, I should not have lied. I should not have lied. And what's really interesting about this, sorry, I'm a geek, I find this fascinating, right? Is that you get not, before these were next to each other, so it was a little bit harder to tease them apart, but now they're not, pun right there, they're not next to each other. You have should higher up than the negation, and you have lower down than the negation. What two categories was not intervening between and betwixt over here? Over here, we found that our negation, our not, was intervening between T and V. It's in between those things. Negation, hold that in your mind if you can. Negation comes between tense and a verbal component. So if we come back to this sentence, I should not have lied, what we find is that, once again, negation comes between tense, modal verb, in tense still, and an auxiliary verb, not truly in tense. This, we will want to say, is then generated in V. Boom. This is going to be a verbal component, which then in turn leads to another verbal component. That's a bit of weirdness that we haven't seen yet, a V going to another V, But that's fine. We get to determine these things as we go anywhere. So that's going to be just fine and something that we'll cover next class. For now, what we want to see is that should is truly generated in T. We see that. Should never occurs below the negation. Should and other modal verbs never occur below the negation. It's truly generated in T, just like tense is. Have, on the other hand, is more interesting. Have often, I missed something in my paradigm here that I'll add in now. Have often appears above negation. We did see this. I drew the tree example. I just didn't write the example on the board here. For I have not lied. I have not lied. Often, this auxiliary verb appears higher than the negation, looking like it's in T here, right? Separating T from V. But in some scenarios, we have this auxiliary verb have lower than this, lower than negation. So sometimes it's lower, sometimes it's higher. What determines whether it's lower or it's higher? Take a second, you can always pause if you need to think about that. What separates this is that it's higher when there's nothing else in T, when T is empty, and it's lower when T is already filled. This tells us something about auxiliaries versus modal verbs. And what it tells us is this. Modal verbs are always generated in T. Auxiliary verbs are generated in V always, below negation. However, when T is empty, the auxiliary verb moves up to T. When the T is empty, auxiliary verbs move up. So they're generated lower than negation in V. Brief brain pause there. They're generated lower than negation in V, but when T is empty, they happily move up. I'll show you what that looks like on a tree, and then we'll wrap it up for the day. This is the last point. Cool. So roughly, we'll talk about this in more depth, like I said, next class, but roughly the structure you get for something like, I have not lied. I not have lied looks like this, where the have is generated lower under the VP. The have is generated lower onto a VP, which itself, this is terrible and you can't see it very well, but generates another VP, which is lied. So that's how you get have lied, right? And so in this scenario, when T up here is empty, have moves to fill the spot. Have moves up there to spill it. Why? Because we want something in T. Well, we want this, whatever is here, whatever the tense of the sentence is. Past in this case. Past. We want something in there to fill this, to have it be attached to, right? And here, we're going to move have up. Wow. Have is going to move up. So I'll put a little trace in there. We'll move have up. Bam. I have not lied. Right? There's my little trace of this moving up. So you get this V to T movement. V to T movement here. We saw earlier T to C movement in yes-no questions. And now we're getting a new type of movement, which is V to T movement. V to T. It's actually really common in the world's languages. Some languages like French, for example, do this with all of their verbs, move all of their verbs up to T. English only does it with auxiliaries, for whatever reason. And I don't have a great explanation for that. Languages are just the way they are, of course, right? T moves up, or V auxiliaries move up to T to get us sentences like, I have not lied. And this also gives us a good explanation for sentences like, I should not have lied. I should not have lied, right? Because if we have that, which I'll draw now, because it's very easy, we have an explanation for why, if we generate it low, we have an explanation for why it's appearing low, which is just to say that it isn't moving in cases where you have something else in T, like a modal verb. So in cases like this, where you have something explicit, overt, happening in, scooch forward a little bit, in T, like should, we now have I should not have lied. I should not have lied. Will V move up to T in this scenario? Nope, nope. Why not? Because there's already something there, right? The impetus of why have, we remember we always want to have reasons for why we move things. The impetus of why we would want to move V to T is because it's empty and we need to have something there for like tense to attach to, for instance. Here we don't have that impetus anymore. There's already something there. So this sentence actually is self-contained. We don't need to move around anything, right? I is fine. We already have a subject, so we're good. We have something in T, so we're good. We have something, these are just where they are. Nothing moves around. So this again gives us an explanation. Our hypothesis here is that have and other auxiliaries are generated in V, and when T is empty, they move up. But when T is not empty, they don't move up. This gives us an explanation of our data of why you get I have not lied with have to the left of not, but here you have I should not have lied with have to the right of not. It explains that paradigm over there through movement. I promise you we'd come back to movement. Generated auxiliaries, generated in V, move up to T. All right. So that wraps up our talk on negation, right? So let's look at our topics and do a quick summary here. We talked about negation and how to draw negation into our trees, right? We put it in between the T level stuff and the V level stuff, and it gets its own phrase, its own major phrase. It's not a modifier of the VP like an adverb would be. It actually gets its own little thing here. So we looked at negation. We looked at do support. Remember that do support was happening in T. Oh. Do support was happening in T with sentences like, I did not go to the store, with that did in there. Rewind the video if you want that in more detail. And we also talked, very importantly, about the difference between modal verbs, which are generated in T, and auxiliary verbs like have and be, which are generated as verbs, as V, and they can move up to T. They have that odd property that other verbs in English don't have, that they can move up to that T spot if it's empty. And that helped us to explain this weird paradigm of sentences that we found in English. See? So we've covered negation, we've covered auxiliaries. On Wednesday's class, what we're going to do is look at auxiliary verbs in more depth. Right? I told you we would come back to why you have lied, like what this ED is doing here, Like if this is getting the tense, what's this tense? Well, that's what we're going to talk about on Wednesday. It's really fun. It's called affix hopping. There's a lot of crazy movement that happens, but it all kind of clicks. Hopefully things are starting to make sense in this sort of structure that we're building. If they're not, as always, ask questions, pipe up, either send me emails, check into office hours on Thursday, 10 to noon. I'll send out another Zoom link, or bring your questions to class on Friday when we meet in person. And that's also a really great place to spread questions where other people can benefit from them. 3 ways to ask questions if this isn't making sense. If it's making perfect sense, well, then relax. And I'll get to you guys later, and I'll post another lecture on Wednesday. Have a good one until then.